Welcome on in, Eagles fans, to a special Hot Take No Huddle show with Joe Giglio along with Eliot, Shorr-Parks, Matt Lombardo. They cover the Eagles for NJ.com Media. We haven't done one of these in a while. Literally, I haven't been on the podcast for a few weeks, and we haven't done a loss, a podcast after a loss, a reaction one, since week 2 when the Eagles went down to the Chiefs. This past week, the Eagles lose in Seattle 24-10. They did not play well. It was sloppy. The refs were an issue. The coaching wasn't great. The quarterback wasn't great. There's a lot to talk about. We have a lot of your reaction on Twitter, a lot of your reaction on email. Let's get into it as we get into a big week here with the Eagles. They'll be in Los Angeles for the full week. The Rams on Sunday. But let's rehash what happened and get to a lot of reaction here. Eliot, it's been a couple days now. The Eagles, I kind of forgot what this was like. The Eagles haven't lost in a long time. And for the first time in a long time, they didn't play well. It wasn't just they got beat by a great team. Seattle's pretty good, and they're great at home. But I thought, Eliot, the biggest theme, we'll get into a lot of the reasons, the Eagles just didn't play well on Sunday night.
Yeah, well, first things first, let me just say, first, let me say, Joe, it's nice to have you back. But second, I'm loving being in California. Like this week that the Eagles are spending out here, I really think it's going to be a test for them. Just from being down, around the team hotel, seeing the players hanging out with their friends and their family. Different players brought their family from back in Philly. I saw a few players that live in California getting their cars delivered to the hotel. I mean, it's going to be a test for them this week, and it's interesting. And I wonder if Doug could do it again, if he would bring the team out to California for a week, because you brought up the Seattle game and how they just didn't play well. To me, one of the biggest takeaways from that game, now that we're 36, 48 hours out from it, is that Doug felt that this team did not prepare well for the game. He said that briefly after the game on Sunday night, and then he said it again to the reporters here in California on Monday. He felt that practice wasn't good the week ahead. He felt that it was sloppy, it wasn't detailed, and that's a red flag to me, because if that's a problem this team's having, yes, it's in that way it's good that they lost. But if the problem that they had leading up to the Seattle game was that they were sloppy, you wonder how a week out in LA is going to be the remedy for that. And, the Eagles didn't play well. I think one of the takeaways was Carson Wentz. When he doesn't play well, this team isn't very good. That's why he's the MVP candidate and maybe the MVP of the league. But I think this week in California is really going to be a test to just how committed this Eagles team is to winning and how mature they are at this point of their rebuilding process.
Yeah, it's a good point. And Matt, this whole thing kind of escalated quickly. I mean, they were 10-1, they were rolling. The Eagles were the talk of the NFL. One loss changes things. They're no longer the number 1 seed in the conference as of now. And you guys are out in California. The Eagles are out in California. We'll get to all the reaction here in a second. But just off the loss, Matt, a couple out, 36, 48 hours later, what are your thoughts on this team as we head into this week?
Yeah, guys, I said after the game that unequivocally the game against the Rams coming off a loss to the Seahawks was an absolute must-win for this team, because I don't think that this Eagles team has the playoff experience necessary or is really built at this stage to go on the road in the playoffs and win. We saw them stumble against a very playoff caliber Seahawks team with an elite quarterback, with a defense that, even though they're banged up on the back end, still very physical up front. The Eagles did rush for 98 yards, but they weren't really effective in running the ball. They weren't effective in running the ball on first and second down, which set up Carson Wentz to be in third and long, and they had some costly turnovers. So it was a really sloppy game, and I think that the Eagles bouncing back from that is imperative. And you look at the standings, Joe, you talked about it right off the jump. They're now the number 2 seed and hanging on by a thread in the NFC in terms of getting a bye in the first round of the playoffs. It goes all the way to the 5th tiebreaker with the Vikings, which is strength of win, and the Eagles aren't catching Minnesota there. They don't play each other head to head. They don't have enough common opponents. The winning percentage of the strength of victory stat, the Vikings are 464, the Eagles are 375. And what that means, it's the winning percentage of the teams that you beat. And the Eagles still have the Giants looming on the schedule. That's not going to do them any favors. But just look at what's behind the Eagles right now. They have the Rams at 9-3, playing really good football. They're believing in themselves, their first winning season in over a decade. You have the Saints at 9-3. Never discount Drew Brees. They have 3 division games, 2 against the Falcons. So you're really going to know what the Falcons are by season's end, whether they're going to be a team with a bye, a team out of the playoffs, or a team in. Don't discount Drew Brees. But my thoughts, guys, they have to win on Sunday, or else they need to come to grips with the mindset that they're playing on Wild Card Weekend.
All right, let's get to a lot of the reaction here, and then we'll circle back and kind of look forward a little bit to the week in California. You guys have and the Eagles have two big themes emerged from the game on Sunday, two big talking points outside the referees, which we'll get into them as well. But the big themes, the big criticism, Eliot, you started with Wentz. We'll start with him, and then we'll get to Doug Pederson, what he did, didn't do, and kind of just the feeling the Eagles had going into that game. But Carson Wentz, I didn't think he played well. I know the second half he put up some big numbers. He had one spectacular play, which he always seems to have one of those a game, which just is amazing. You say, how did he do that? But he missed throws. The first half to Nelson Agholor, the second half to start the half to Agholor. If he pits him in stride, I think Aguilar's still running. I mean, Agholor could have had 200 yards in that game if Wentz played better. And then, of course, the fumble out of the end zone. Here's some of the reaction, and we'll get your thoughts on the way Wentz played. At J.D. Carr, still waiting from that come-from-behind win for Wentz. Still have not seen it. Can't win a championship without a quarterback who does not have the it factor. Hashtag the No Huddle Show. A. Snyder, A1, too many self-inflicted wounds. Wentz's inaccuracy. And then Vincent said Alshon Holding and Wentz fumbling were fatal. Wentz played really bad. Very concerning. Eliot, just your thoughts on Wentz, someone we haven't had the opportunity to have anything really critical to say for a long time.
Did I hear you correctly saying that the fan said Wentz doesn't have the it factor?
So, well, at least one did.
So, I mean, I would disagree with that, in my opinion. I think Wentz has shown he's shown part of it last year, and I think in the first 11 games this year, he's shown that he does have that it factor. That being said, as many times as we've done this podcast this year, and we've talked about Super Bowl aspirations and all those things, we've always said that the biggest threat to them is that they don't have the experience, and they don't have the playoff experience that the other teams have. And that's what you saw in Seattle, and to a certain degree, I think that's what you saw with Wentz a little bit. I mean, he just didn't play well. For as much as we want to talk about, the defense struggled with Russell Wilson. I thought it was a rough week for the Doug for Head Coach of the Year campaign. I thought he, made a few questionable decisions. At the end of the day, if Wentz plays better, that game is much closer, if not a winnable game. I mean, you mentioned the throw to Agholor. That's a throw he absolutely has to make. Even the completion, the 32-yard completion they had in, I think it was the third quarter, if he throws that better, Agholor might score on that. And then the fumble going in. I mean, that I think falls more on the line of just a great play by Sheldon Richardson, but it's still unacceptable if you're a quarterback to fumble the ball like that as you're going into the end zone in such a close game. So, I mean, for all the praise Wentz gets every week, he gets plenty of it nationally. He certainly gets a lot of it on this podcast. This is not the week for him. He was really bad, and he's the top reason they lost the game.
Yeah, Eliot, we talked about this a little bit on the post-game reaction pod from CenturyLink, and it's the fact that all year we've talked about Carson Wentz rising to the occasion, being dominant, the numbers that he's putting up, and he's really been the catalyst to the Eagles' success. I think that Sunday night was the first time, and going back and rewatching the game on the flight a little bit on the way down to Los Angeles yesterday, I thought this was the first time that he kind of shrunk to the moment. And I don't put all the blame on him, because Seattle did a really nice job of pressuring him specifically up front, and Halapoulivaati Vaitai, he was just getting beat left and right, didn't play well, and the result was Carson Wentz not having a lot of time in the pocket. And as a result, after he got hit a couple of times, there were 2 or 3 throws where he was really flat-footed in the pocket. His mechanics seemed off. Like we talked about, missing that throw to Agholor in the first quarter. I put it on Twitter during the game after it happened. I knew it was early, and I didn't want to sound like I was overreacting, but that felt like a game-deciding type of play, because we can talk about the Eagles playing down to the moment. We can talk about Carson Wentz, reverting back to maybe some of his mechanical mistakes that he made as a rookie and feeling the pressure both of the crowd, both of the actual pressure of the pass rush. But I just don't think that he played all that well, as you said. And I think that when you have two teams like the Seattle Seahawks that needed that game, I mean, they lose that game, basically all hope for them winning the division is lost. Basically, tiebreaker situations with them and the Falcons and the Panthers are lost. They needed that game. They played like it. It was a hostile environment. And I thought that Wentz kind of shrunk in the moment. And I don't think that, he got a whole lot of help because the receivers didn't get a whole lot of separation. Zach Ertz got hurt. And the offensive line, outside of maybe Lane Johnson and Jason Kelce, didn't play all that well either.
No, they didn't. But Wentz, Matt mentioned, Eliot, his mechanics, the overthrow to Agholor was so bad. And it just feels like the game on Sunday, when they play teams like the Seahawks in the playoffs, when they play teams with really good quarterbacks in the playoffs, Drew Brees possibly, maybe the Seahawks again with Russell Wilson, any type of Super Bowl matchup likely will have a great quarterback on the other side. Wentz has to at least match the other quarterback. They've gone so long where they played just a bunch of guys he's better than and their teams are better than. We haven't had a quarterback duel in a while. We might get another one on Sunday, but Russell Wilson just totally outplayed Carson Wentz on Sunday.
And yeah, let me just say too, I do agree with Matt that Wentz didn't rise to the moment, but let me throw this at you guys. When I rewatch the game and I kind of think about what happened, the Seahawks were in Wentz's face from the jump. I mean, they hit him early. They hit him on that slide. They hit him after a throw, and I don't want to say it rattled him, but it does seem like teams this year haven't really been able to get to Wentz, number one. But when I've seen teams hit Wentz this year, he's more like just kind of clapped and looked towards the sideline and kind of walked away. He was engaging it a little bit. And I'll ask you guys, do you think those early hits had an impact on him? And I don't want to say it's a blueprint, but are we seeing that, if you're the Rams and you watch what the Seahawks did, you take a 15-yard penalty early in the game, but then it turned into Wentz's worst game of the year. Do you guys think those hits rattled him early on?
Oh, I think absolutely. And we talked about this a little bit in the press box afterwards, Eliot. And I think you're absolutely right. Between the hit when he was sliding that wound up drawing the penalty, between a couple of hits in the pocket after he threw the ball, some brutal hits that didn't result as a sack because it got there maybe just a hair late. The one he came up kind of grimacing, looked like he was in pain. I think you're absolutely right. You got to remember, this is a veteran coaching staff with Pete Carroll. It's a very aggressive and dominant, opportunistic defense that Seattle has, particularly in that front seven. And I think the game plan was, hey, nobody has really gotten to Wentz this year. Let's rattle the kid. They're in our house. We knocked him around last year when he didn't have a lot of weapons and he didn't play all that well. We can feed off of our crowd. It can kind of snowball and build some momentum behind us. And, to the Seahawks' credit, they were able to generate the kind of pass rush on this offensive line to make that happen. And that's what concerns me, and not to look too far ahead to Sunday. But you have Michael Brockers and Aaron Donald. They're combined for 11 or 12 sacks on the year. That's another team that can get to Wentz, that can rattle him and make him uncomfortable in the pocket. He didn't respond well at all to pressure the other night. And if you're going to beat the Rams, it might get into a shootout situation because of all of their weapons on offense. If Wentz doesn't learn from that tape, or if they don't make the adjustments along the offensive line, like maybe putting Brent Selleck over on Vitai's side, maybe, maybe using Corey Clement in a pass chipping, helping situation, it could be another long night for Carson Wentz. I mean, he needs to respond to what happened on Sunday night against a defense that's capable of replicating that same blueprint.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I'll throw this stat at you guys. So this is from Pro Football Focus. The Eagles' offensive line allowed 27 pressures on Sunday night. That's 8 more than any other offensive line had this past weekend. And it was the highest number since 13 in week 2 against the Chiefs. So it's double that, more than double that. And then they haven't done that since week 2. So it's been, Carson hasn't faced this in a long time. Eliot, we'll kind of can move this into a discussion about Pederson, and we'll do kind of a big picture thing on Pederson and decisions. But what do you think about the way Doug has to now maybe move forward, protect Carson? Do you think this is a big problem, or was it just Seattle's defense is good? It was a tough night for Vaitai and the offensive line.
That's a tough question because on one hand, I do think Vaitai has played well this season for the most part. He's certainly among the 5 offensive linemen now that Peters is gone. He certainly has been the worst of the 5. If we talk about shrinking to the moment, I do think it's worth mentioning that if you look along that offensive line, Kelsey is a veteran, Wisniewski is a veteran, Brandon Brooks is a veteran, Lane Johnson's a veteran. Vaitai's in his second year. So, maybe the crowd, the moment of playing in Seattle got to him. But if we just talk from a strictly X's and O's standpoint, I mean, I know I've said that I think that their playoff experience is their biggest weakness. But if we're just talking about the 22 starters, Vaitai is an issue. He's the biggest issue among them, I should say, at least. The cornerbacks have played better. The running backs obviously have done a pretty good job, even though they weren't that great in Seattle. But Vaitai and his ability to protect Wentz is huge. I mean, if quarterback's the most important position in the league, left tackle is the second most important because that's the guy that protects your quarterback. And if Vaitai's not going to get the job done, this Eagles team's it's in a lot of trouble. So the question going forward will be, was this just Vaitai having a bad game because he shrunk to the moment in Seattle? And how will he step up next time when this team does make the playoffs? Or was this just maybe a sign of things to come? And if it is, the Eagles are in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, they will be. And they have to coach around it if it's, if that's the reality now for this offensive line. All right, let's talk about the coaching. Doug Pederson, again, another person, another key figure on this team we haven't criticized much. There hasn't been reason to criticize in a long time. He got some on Sunday night. He's been getting it since. All right, I think there's a couple of ways we could take this, Matt. We could talk about the game plan itself, the way they played, and then some of Doug's decisions. Let's just start with the kind of the overall game plan. There was a feeling after this game, really during it, that Doug, for the first time in a while, wasn't himself, which means wasn't aggressive, didn't go for it on those fourth downs, came out running more than passing, even though the secondary for Seattle, a little banged up. That might have been a protect Vitae, but just that's kind of the theme off of Doug this week. Matt, what did you think about the way Doug coached, kind of philosophically, more conservative than we've seen in recent past?
Yeah, I thought, guys, to be honest with you, I thought maybe he was a little bit intimidated by Pete Carroll. It just, Pete Carroll's a veteran coach, and you're going on the road into that environment. I think that being off and being not quite himself kind of sums up, the performance from Doug the other night. I mean, you look at just the first quarter alone, when they decided to punt on 4th and 1 from the 47, I get it. And at the time I tweeted, hey, don't go for that there, pin the Seahawks back, tilt the field, get the field position. But there were a couple other situations where he did go for it. And then the challenge play on the 3rd and inches where they went for it anyway and QB sneaked, which was the drive that was capped with the Carson Wentz fumble. Just it felt like some mental lapses from Doug Pederson. I don't really understand why you challenge there if you're going to go for it anyway with a 6'5" quarterback who excels at the quarterback sneaks. I thought they didn't take enough chances downfield, as you talked about, without Cam Chancellor being back there and the Seahawks being banged up without Richard Sherman. It just didn't feel like Doug was as aggressive as he's been all year. And I think that we saw the 2016 version of Doug Pederson versus what we've seen in 2017. And Eliot, you and I touched on this a little bit during the game, just sitting there watching and going back and forth. That felt like that Packers game. It felt like that Packers Monday night game against Aaron Rodgers, where they had the 1-yard challenge spot where, you could question a lot of Doug's decisions in that game last year. I just think that whether it was not having his team completely prepared, whether it was being worried about the lack of preparation from practice, whether he thought that his team had gotten maybe too big of a head sitting there at 10-1 and they were full of themselves a little bit, whatever he was over guarded against, I think the pendulum swung way too far to the conservative side of things when this team has been so aggressive, when Doug Pederson has been so aggressive on the year.
And then, not to keep harping on the lack of experience, but again, Doug is also a young head coach, and I think that he did get a little conservative in a big spot there. And the issue with the forward pass, or the pass that looked to be forward by Russell Wilson that he should have challenged, he talked about that on Monday after the game, and he got a little defensive. The reporters asked, well, what did you do wrong there? What happened that you didn't challenge that play? And he said, well, what do you mean what happened wrong? And he got a little defensive about the process, and he said essentially he basically blamed not challenging that call on the fact that he had lost a challenge already on that Torrey Smith challenge, which you mentioned. I agree was not a good challenge when you already have 4th and inches and a big quarterback. But he basically said because he lost that challenge, he was hesitant to challenge something else, and the Eagles didn't get a good look at it. So in that way, it does make sense. But I just think sitting in the booth there, being in the stadium, that felt like a huge – I mean, it was a huge play, but also it just completely swung the game back in the Seahawks' favor. So I just think the fact that Wilson's running down the middle of the field – I would have challenged it and just taken the shot there because the chance he didn't do a forward pass there seemed very slim. So I think Doug, I don't want to say he shrunk to the moment as well, but I do think he got his first taste of coaching on the road in a big playoff game. And no, the results weren't encouraging, but I think, just like Wentz in a way, I think now with Doug, I'm confident enough in his ability to coach that I don't think it's overly concerning. The same way with Wentz. I think they'll both bounce back, but it was concerning to see.
Here's some reaction we had on Doug Pederson here, and we can kind of react off of this. Pederson, his worst game of the year, coached not to lose, and just lost some points in my book. The Eagles should be worried about. Pederson needs to lose his challenge duties. He also can't have a toss play on 3rd and 1. Doug is going to prevent this team from winning a Super Bowl. Those are from at Osprey for Life, at G
How the tide turned
75.
so quickly. How the tide
it's amazing.
turned so quick.
At first_son_MD. Matt, in terms of Doug and the challenge stuff, Eliot just touched on it. I feel the same way that I know it's tough. I think it's tough for us to sit here or you guys up in the booth or any fan at home and say, just throw the flag. Meanwhile, Doug's on the field. He clearly didn't have any angle. I mean, wherever he was on the sideline, he probably had almost zero ability to gauge if that was a lateral or not by Russell Wilson. And I'm sure upstairs they're telling him, I'm not sure. Seattle's going the line. I get that. But it was kind of alarming to hear him say that the first half decision, which was wrong, whether it was the booth or him making that final call and deciding on doing it, that dictated the second half decision. That felt like a play in the second half, the Russell Wilson lateral, that was worth the gamble. Yet the first one, the first challenge, basically dictated whether or not he would take a gamble there.
Guys, let's not forget that if he challenges that play and it gets overturned as it should have and as it probably would have, that was a 3rd down and 8 play. And that forward pass, that's a penalty and a loss of down. So it's 4th down. So, I really can't understand. And I get it that the answer of, we didn't have protractors in the booth like they do on TV and it's limited time and blah, 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 blah. But as a head coach and as whoever is advising him from the booth, you have to weigh the risk versus the reward there. The risk is, okay, you lose a timeout. So maybe then you only have what at that time would have been 2 timeouts remaining in the second half, and
you lose your second challenge. That's no more challenges.
You have no more challenges, okay, and that's all well and good. But the benefit is there's a very good chance you're getting the ball back there. There's a very good chance they're going to reverse that, and the Seahawks are going to punt the ball to you. And that was a game-defining play. I mean, you were down 17-10 at that time. You obviously at that moment don't know that your defense is going to buckle and you're going to give up a touchdown on that drive, and you're not going to be able to overcome it. But getting the ball back down 17-10 with what would you have had 7 minutes left in the game, that's a lot different than getting it back down 2 scores. So whether it was not having an angle, whether it was getting bad advice, I think Doug Pederson needs to have a better sense for risk versus reward in that case, because if it's me, I'm okay losing a timeout. I'm okay not being able to challenge because of the score, the time, the situation, and that if you get it right, that's a loss of down penalty and you're getting the ball back. So I thought that was a critical mistake and maybe the worst decision he's made since last year.
Before we get to the next reader question, let me throw this at Joe, because I know on the postgame pod, it's something me and Matt discussed a lot. And I've been really interested to see the reaction to the loss in general on Twitter and from callers. Although actually I haven't been able to hear a ton of callers coming out west, but just from the different fan reaction to the loss in terms of how big of a deal is it? So let me ask you, Joe, what is the mood like there back in Philadelphia since that loss? And what's your opinion on whether, is this a concerning loss? Is this one they can just kind of brush off? Or do you think this is this a legitimate loss where you can sit there and say, all right, this is changing my outlook on this team?
I think people are concerned because, I think there was a sense last week, guys, that people were making too much of the fact they haven't played many good teams, right? You are who you play who's on your schedule, you beat them and whatnot. But now they played a good team and lost. So I think people are starting to maybe maybe that was real. Maybe that stuff about them not playing anyone was real, and maybe there is reason to worry. I think there's a lot of angst now, and people are looking forward because it will give a sense, another litmus test to how good they are. But I do think that the other segment, and I'm sure we'll get to this more into this episode, that they beat themselves more than the Seahawks beat them. I think that I take that as a positive.
I disagree.
I disagree. Yeah.
I think the Seahawks beat them.
Yeah.
I don't think obviously whenever you lose a game, you don't play your best. That's a lot of times why you lost. But I disagree. I don't think just watching it, to me, it didn't look like the Eagles just didn't play as well as they normally do. I mean, Wentz didn't play well, but I do think the Seahawks in the moment and the stadium and all that, I think that played a role in it. I don't think the Seahawks are better than the Eagles, but I think on that night they played considerably better. And I think they outcoached, they outplayed, they out-hustled, they just beat the Eagles. And
here's the other thing. And I took a lot of heat back after the San Francisco game by saying that was the blueprint to beat the Eagles. And I think that what we've seen, not necessarily, my point back then was that the Eagles made a lot of mistakes early and they were able to overcome those mistakes, able to overcome not playing well in the first half because they were just simply the better team. There was more talent across the board, and ultimately talent is going to win out. We've seen this team kind of walk a high wire act over the last couple of weeks when it comes comes to turnovers, when it comes to penalties. You saw it against the Bears. They got away with it against the Cowboys, a sloppy first half, because, again, without Ezekiel Elliott, that offense changes completely, and Dak Prescott is a different quarterback without Ezekiel Elliott back there, and the Eagles defense forced him into making some costly mistakes, and Wentz turned it around in the second half. You talked to Jason Kelce, you talked to Lane Johnson, you talked to Torrey Smith after the game on Sunday, and guys, they all said the same thing. Jason Kelce flat out said, we've had a lot of penalties, we've had a lot of turnovers, and you can play that way and win when you're the better team. The point here is the Seahawks and the Eagles, the discrepancy between the two of them, just as it's going to be on Sunday, because I think the Rams and Eagles and the way that they're built, they're really a mirror image of one another, and the talent gap isn't all that different. But Sunday night, you saw two playoff caliber teams. You saw two teams that are built to win in the postseason, and it can be one penalty. It can be one overthrow. It can be one mistake that determines the game. I think that Eagles fans have really gotten high on this, 17-point wins and putting up 51 points on the number one defense in the league. We lose sight of what competitive football is supposed to look like. And, the stats weren't all that different. The Eagles rushed for 98 yards. I believe that the Seahawks rushed for something like 101. Time of possession wasn't all that different. It's just those one or two mistakes cost this team. And playoff caliber teams, Super Bowl caliber teams, they don't make as many mistakes as the Eagles have made over the last couple of weeks. They've gotten away with it before. They're not going to get away with it against teams like Seattle, against the Rams, against the Vikings, and if they somehow make the Super Bowl against the Patriots or the Steelers.
Well, that's fair. No, they won't. I mean, you saw that. They're not good. No team really in the NFL is good enough against another good team, especially on the road, a desperate team, to play like that and win. But here's why I say they beat themselves. They had 16 more plays. They had over 100 more yards. They had more yards per play. I mean, I can make a case if Wentz doesn't fumble the ball and he hits Aguilar when he literally would have walked into the end zone, I think he would have made it all the way. They win, or it's tied with a minute to go, whatever.
I agree.
The game was that close, even though they played like garbage in moments.
The only thing I disagree with you on, I agree with the missing Aguilar for sure. But I think we say, well, Wentz fumbled the ball. I think a more accurate way to say that is Sheldon Richardson stripped the ball out of Wentz's grip.
Okay.
All right, well, let's change the terminology and say that he scores a touchdown. If he scores that touchdown, and if you hit Nelson Aguilar and he scores a touchdown, that's a 21-point swing because the Seahawks went down, recovered that fumble, and scored. So to me, I'm with Joe. If you score on that drive when Wentz had the ball stripped or it fumbled it out of the end zone, and if he hits Aguilar in the first quarter, do the math. It's a tie ball game as it is, but I think they win the game. I think they win the game without those two mistakes.
I don't think so. I don't. Just being there, watching it, I think the Seahawks were the better team that night. I think they were more prepared for it. I think this is the first time I've seen all year a team come out and smack the Eagles in the mouth, and the Eagles just not be able to handle it at all. I think the Seahawks were going to win that game regardless of it. And, I mean, again, you can say, well, if he hits Aguilar, if he hits Aguilar, maybe it changes things a little bit. But the fumble thing was not just Wentz jumping the ball. I mean, that was the Seahawks doing what they did all game, which is basically, in my opinion, outplay the Eagles. So I think that from the jump, when they fell behind quickly, they fell behind 10-0. And I tweeted this, and it's crazy to think, but the Eagles are 10-1. They have one of the best offenses in the league. They have the MVP candidate. When they fell behind 10-0, I was positive they weren't coming back. And maybe it says something about what I really feel about the team, but I think that was a feeling from a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people believe the Eagles were going to come back and win that game.
No, it's a very difficult. I think a lot of people last week, because the Seahawks are down and they had lost 2 straight home games, it was like, oh, well, Seattle's not a tough place to play anymore. And you look up after the game, they're 48-3 in their last 51 home games. It's a tough place to play. I'm with you, Eliot. When they fell down, it felt like just not going to be their night. Let's get on to one more thing that was the theme from the game, and then we'll kind of look forward. And there's some response, people remaining positive about after the loss, which is always a weird thing. We had a bunch of tweets about the referee. I want to get the refereeing. Your thoughts. You guys were there in the building. What you thought of
our
the calls.
favorite subject?
Yeah, I was going to say, I really want to go first on this one. Go ahead.
All right. So here, I'll read the 3, and I'll give you a stat, which I think is interesting, if nothing else. All right. At 80 and Crawl said, not going to say the refs lost us the game, but it had an impact, which shouldn't happen in professional sports. At Cantonu 575, the Eagles could not beat the refs this time around. At not Ion Zurl, the refs were awful, but you might have that in the playoffs. Now, I saw this stat. Actually, Angelo Cataldi, who writes once in a while, he threw this stat out. I didn't hear him say it, but I saw him write it. So Tony Correnti was the lead referee on Sunday night. Seahawks are 18-5 when they have Correnti. Eagles are now 5-10-1 under Correnti. Take those numbers for what they were, but just those are reality now. Tony Correnti. Ellie, you go first. Refs on Sunday night. I didn't think they were good, but I didn't think that's why the Eagles lost the football game.
Eagles fans every week sound like a bunch of complaining soccer parents fans on the sideline, just complaining about the referee. Every call that they get flagged on was a bad call. Every time something happens, they should have been flagged. That wasn't. It's the end of the world. It's. I'm not saying it's pathetic, but it's every week. You can't blame the referees for the loss at all in this game. The Eagles are a team. First of all, the Eagles are a team that struggles with penalties in general, and this isn't some big attempt by the refs just colluding together and making sure that they don't flag Fletcher Cox being held. I mean, the Eagles at times are a sloppy team. They're still a relatively young team at big positions, and it shows. And they get flagged a lot. So you can point to what a certain team's record is when a ref's calling it or whatever. The Eagles did not play well on Sunday night. The refs had absolutely zero to do with it. Yes, I know the Darby pass interference call wasn't a good one. I'm aware. But that was very early on in the game. The Eagles did not lose this game at all because of the refs. And honestly, hearing fans complain about it every week, whether it's against Seattle, whether it's the Pete Morelli thing back from Carolina, they got to get over it. It is what it is. The referee, being a ref's a tough job. Every week, every fan of every team feels like they're not getting the calls. And if the Eagles,
and you know what that means, Eliot? That means the refs are doing their job, because it's the same reason that everybody hates Joe Buck. Joe Buck stays neutral, right? Joe Buck isn't going to be Merrill Reese. He's not going to be Mark Zumoff. He's going to call it like it is down the middle. And you know why Joe Buck is one of the best announcers out there? Because you can fly into any city and every fan base is going to bitch and moan about the way Joe Buck calls games. It isn't an axe to grind against anybody. There's no fan base that he's out to hate or torture. Just like these refs the other night, we can talk about the records of games that they officiated and all of those things. I'm with you. I don't think that the refs had any impact on that game whatsoever. And if we want to talk about the lateral pass that wasn't called, that's a bang-bang play live. On tape, it's pretty much a bang-bang play. But if Doug Pederson throws the challenge flag there and it gets overturned, that changes the whole scope of that entire game. And I don't think we're looking at the refs the same way. And to hold that call against an officiating crew is silly, because it looks like it comes down to inches or even centimeters as to whether or not that was a forward pass or not.
Yeah, I agree. And the funny part, you brought up Buck, Matt. Joe Buck had a tweet during the playoffs, and he put two tweets that he had received next to each other and screenshotted it. And one was someone, it was during the Yankees Astro series. One was someone from Houston. It was like, "You suck, you root for the Yankees." And then it was someone from New York. It was like, "You suck, you're rooting for the Astros." And I just thought it was perfect because, I mean, obviously he gets that all the time. I didn't think they were great. The Darby, but they weren't great on either side. The Darby play was obviously a penalty on the Eagles. It didn't even out. I mean, that stuff happens. The Eagles, that's like reason towards the bottom, if you want to even put it on a list of reasons they lost the game. There's so many other things.
Speaking of referees, and this could be, I'm sure we got some emails about Alshon, but the holding call, we're talking about big plays from the game. The holding call on Alshon, I believe it was on the first drive, or it was definitely early on in the game, where LeGarrette Blount runs from the 14-yard line down to the 4. Alshon has a pretty meaningless holding call where, I mean, I think Blount would have, got where he did without that. Negates the run, pushes him back. I thought that was huge. And, in Alshon's first game, I got a lot of heat for writing this, but in Alshon's first game since signing that extension, he was a non-factor. He was basically who Alshon is the majority of the time. He had a few catches. He had, somewhere between 50 and 70 yards, and he made a mistake. And
it was a blatant penalty. I mean,
it was a blatant penalty. It was absolutely
you can't point to the refs. I mean, we can talk about it being a pointless penalty, which it was. He blatantly held there. So for fans saying, "Oh, why'd you throw that flag?" or "There's holding on every play," or what else is being lobbed in our direction on Twitter the other night, it was a blatant call, and it was a call that had to be made. I don't want to get into a whole Alshon Jeffrey debate because we're 35, 40 minutes into the podcast. I kind of dispute the notion that he's a non-factor, quote unquote, most of the time. But he didn't play well on Sunday night. I agree with you. Nelson Aguilar was the better receiver. But you look at what what Alshon Jeffrey had did in the previous weeks against Denver, what he did against the Bears the other day against his former team. He has big games, he has big moments, but he's not a top 3 or 4 receiver in the league, but he's also not the 40th receiver in the league either.
Well, statistically, he might be. I'll have to look it up, but I mean, he's not being paid like the 40th receiver. He's being paid like a top 10 guy. Statistically, between catches and yards, I don't think he's in the top 15 or 20. So, Joe, what do you think of the deal? You haven't had a chance to really. I said on the last pod, I feel bad for Matt that he misses his chance to shine about the deal, and then Alshon has a bad game first time he's on the on the pod. But Joe, what do you think of the extension?
I wasn't surprised they extended him because that's what the Eagles always want to do, keep their guys. And I mean, look, if you told me before March that they got Alshon on a 5-year, $61 million deal, which I think when you add it all together, the 1-year deal he's on, plus what they just gave him, I would have said that's a good deal. I was a little surprised at all the guaranteed money because I haven't been overly impressed with what he's been this year, and I worry about his body moving forward. So I was kind of in the middle. Like, I get it. I know they want to re-sign him. He's a good player. I thought they might have got him cheaper if they kept him and waited to the offseason. But
see, that's where I disagree.
Obviously, Howie knows what he's doing there in terms of maneuvering the cap to keep him.
Yep. I think that if you waited until the offseason, there are going to be a lot of teams with a lot of money to spend. The cap goes up every year. And you look at the names that are going to be available. Allen Robinson coming off a torn ACL. Larry Fitzgerald in the twilight of his career. There aren't many big-name top flight wide receivers. And all it takes is one team to come in and say, hey, Alshon, we'll guarantee you $16.5 million per year. Say the Cleveland Browns, for example. There are teams that can throw silly money around. That's how you wound up losing Jeremy Maclin, that a team comes in at the last minute and outbids you. I know that's no way to do business in terms of situations with Maclin versus Jeffrey, but it's proactive to lock up the players that you think are part of your core. And when we talk about Carson Wentz's continued development, I don't know that he stays on this trajectory without a veteran, talented wide receiver of Jeffrey's caliber. And I don't know how you give him that for this year and then take that asset and that weapon away next year. So I think this is a long-term play much more than it is a 1 or 2 year deal for the Eagles.
Yeah, that makes sense. But on Sunday, off his first game with the new contract, Nelson Aguilar was obviously the best receiver they had on the field. Yep. He gets open the most, and maybe that's just a product of the offense and the way Doug schemes it. But I feel like if there's a big play, I feel like Nelson's the one I think is going to make it. All right, let's look forward a little bit here. I know you guys will do a preview podcast. You'll be out in Los Angeles, the California trip all week with the Eagles. But just there was some positives off of the game in terms of reaction and in terms of people feeling that, this thing is not over yet. And there's a lot for the Eagles to look forward to on Sunday. And there are a lot of people who feel like, hey, there's a big game on Sunday. There's still a lot of positives. Eliot, how do you feel as we just look at this team heading into Sunday and in terms of where they're at and the positives off of they lost the game, but now it's a big challenge against the Rams?
So from being out here in LA, I think, and I really hate saying this because I've been so like, they're going to smoke the Rams aren't that good, blah, blah, blah. I think staying out here in LA is a mistake. I think it's something that, especially coming off that week of bad practices for the Seahawks game, and now you're out here. Just, I know I don't always see the players on their off days, so it's a little bit of a different perspective for me. But like, I just really think that it's practicing out here with being at the baseball stadium and all that. I think it's bad. My first day here, like, obviously I'm loving the weather and I'm being out here, and I mean, I'm pumped I'm out here, but I don't have to play on Sunday. And I don't know. I'm not feeling as positive about this Rams game as I used to. And I promise I'm not using it as an excuse. If the Rams beat the Eagles, I will let Matt have his glory. But I'm just saying, I do not have a good feel for this game.
Yeah, I'm not looking for glory. I'm just saying that when you look at teams in the NFL and you look at teams in the NFC, if we want to say the Eagles are the best team in the NFC, right? If we want to talk for weeks and weeks and weeks about they're the team to beat because they have Carson Wentz, because they run the ball, because they pressure the quarterback, and they have a good offensive line. And they were well coached, right? Those are the 5 attributes. All I've been trying to say, and all people don't want to hear, is that you look at the Rams. good young quarterback, dominant running game, dominant wide receivers, dominant offensive line, aggressive pass rushing defense. See a comparison there? Again, I'm not looking for any glory. I'm not looking here trying to sound like a Rams fan. I just think the Rams are really good. And I think that we saw the Eagles go up against another team that's really good into the Seattle Seahawks, even though they're banged up on the road. And I think this is a really tough spot. I don't know that I would have flown the whole operation back and forth and taken a 9-hour flight home and a 9-hour flight back. I think staying out here is the right move, but how they respond to it, how they respond to the things that Eliot's talking about, that's going to be critical. Can they be more focused? Is this going to be like a training camp situation where everybody's hunkered down in the team hotel? Are they going to have organized activities throughout the day? Maybe it's better that they were here as a group on their off day so they could kind of sit around and maybe pop in some extra film, maybe talk about what happened on Sunday night. Maybe it's better that they're clustered at that hotel. We're going to see how it plays out, but I think that if they lose this game, I think it's just because the Rams were the better team. Just like if they win it, it's going to show you that the Eagles achieved, in my opinion, what will go down as their most impressive victory of the season.
Yeah, there's a couple of responses here in terms of being positive heading into this Rams game, and I think the Rams are good too, Matt. I mean, both these teams are averaging 30.1 points a game, and their point differentials are basically identical. It's like 140-ish each. They both have been good. It's a big test, but a lot of people are hanging on the positives. At Master Freak said, I wouldn't say it's a concerning loss, just more humbling. At Lball94, I think it's good for them. Learning experience, time to refocus out on the West Coast. And at Frank J. Hall, we can overcome this, got to clean up the mistakes. Wentz needs to be a bit smarter, but we're fine. Eliot, we'll end with this, and you guys, I'm sure, will have a prediction later in the week. How big do you think this game is? Not just in terms of, I mean, obviously the reality is, if they don't win, they're probably not going to get the number one seed. That's probably going to be out. But I just mean their psyche in terms of what they can accomplish. Do you put this as, I think you might have said it on the podcast, is this a must-win? Is this a very big game? How do you look at this game now compared to what had just happened in Seattle?
If they lose both the Seahawks game and this Rams game, I think it dramatically changes how we look at this team. Like, dramatically. So in that way, it's a must-win. I mean, look, they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to host a home playoff game, and if they win that game, you'll look at the team differently heading into the second round because
probably
they'll
on
have
the road.
Some momentum, right? All that stuff. But my point is, if they lose both of these games, it's huge. And I think it's absolutely a must-win game for their psyche, for the standings, for all that stuff. I think just with how much this team talked about wanting to send a message to the NFL on these 2 weeks and proving themselves, for them to go 0-2, I think would be a pretty big blow to their psyche. It's a must-win game. They have to win it, and if they don't, fans are not going to like what we say on this podcast because they're going to have to deal with a lot of harsh realities about what this team is if they do lose.
Yep, and you said it, Eliot. It's not what we say. It's the harsh reality of the situation. If they lose this game, they'll have lost head-to-head to both the Seahawks and the Rams. The Rams would leapfrog them for the second seed in the playoffs. You're playing from behind for the rest of the way, and you're hoping that the Rams slip up. And I know that they have a couple tough games down the stretch, but you don't want to put yourself in that tiebreaker situation because you already lose the tiebreaker to Minnesota. You lose head-to-head to Los Angeles. I think this is an absolute must-win because I don't believe in this team going on the road in a second-round playoff game. And at all costs, you have to avoid playing that first playoff game because if you host the Seattle Seahawks coming east, if you host the New Orleans Saints coming east with Drew Brees or Russell Wilson, those are two losable football games. And you can talk about all you want that this team wasn't supposed to be here, that they exceeded expectations. If you start 10-1 and you lose at home on Wild Card Weekend, that's a monumental disappointment. And I think that winning this game kind of turns the tide. You come back home, you reset with a game against the Giants, which is going to be no picnic at MetLife, especially with a new coach, but you reset, and I think that you kind of keep pace to at least at the bare minimum get the bye. And players have been talking about getting a bye week for at least the last two games afterwards. So this is a must-win because if you lose this game, it becomes much more difficult to get that bye week and to get any more than one home game during the playoffs.
Yeah, I'll end with this. I think it's going to be the pivot point for where they are in January for how this season ends. I guess you call it a must-win for those from that perspective. Obviously, they're 10-2. Like, it's not really a must-win. But for all the things you guys are talking about, it feels like it. So the Vikings play in Carolina on Sunday. They could lose that game. The Eagles win. All of a sudden, they're probably the number one seed again. And I don't.
Or they could win.
Or the
Vikings could go in and win.
Totally.
Don't shortchange Case Keenum in that defense.
No, I'm not. But
don't shortchange Case Keenum is a sentence I thought I would never hear.
Neither did I.
Did you? I mean, if you watched him lately, though.
No, I know. I agree. It's just funny that that's what we've reached with him. But
it's
I agree.
This weekend I think we'll flip everything. If Minnesota loses, and they could certainly win, and the Eagles win, I think it turns again. And I don't think the Eagles will lose this season if they win this game, if they want to play out each week. I don't know how Doug's going to rest guys in week 17. But the other way, like Matt, you were alluding to, Case Keenum can win Sunday again. The Eagles could lose. The bye's out, and then we're wondering if they're going to even get, or the first round home field advantage is out, and then we wonder if they're going to get a bye. So we'll have a whole different conversation next week on their trajectory based on this game. Guys, enjoy California. This has been fun. And Eliot, I'm looking at it. What are we at? 310 reviews on the pod?
Yeah, we're getting up there. Yeah, something like that. We wanted 310 by the Rams game, so we're already ahead of that, which obviously...
We got it before the Seattle game. We're ahead of pace.
We did. Unlike the Eagles, we're keeping pace here. They're falling off a little bit. We're keeping pace. So I appreciate everyone, and I'm looking forward to Fan Friday because we asked people to say where they're listening from, and we got a ton of different answers. I will say quickly, we got a few people from North Dakota, which I liked because I didn't think no one had said that before, so that was cool. But I look forward to Friday reading some reviews and talking about where you guys are listening from. So if you're listening and you haven't done it yet, and you want to have your review and a shout out to your hometown read on the pod, get that done before Friday because we will do it on Friday.
Sounds great. Matt, as always, thanks for doing this. Enjoy California.
Looking forward to the week, looking forward to the game, and we'll talk to you next week, Joe.
You got it. Thanks, Eliot. Enjoy California.
Yep, talk to you guys soon.
And thanks to all of you for listening to this episode of the No Huddle Show. As Eliot was saying, subscribe on iTunes, anywhere you listen to podcasts, and leave us a rating. We're looking for as many as we could get on the path as we go through this season. Thanks for listening right here on NJ.com.